Do you want to get an AI to write a prompt for you? Anthropic have just released a new feature called Metaprompts, which does exactly that. All you need to do is provide the task along with some optional variables, and Claude will generate a very well-crafted prompt for you. In this video today, I'm going to show you exactly how you can get all of that set up locally with code. And of course, I'm going to show you how you can build your own project. Not only will this give you a really good understanding of Metaprompts, but you can also tailor this to your own application. And I'm going to put all of this together in a project which will get Claude to write a prompt that will generate a study plan for us, and we'll make it interesting by getting Claude to write a prompt that's going to help us learn Python. It takes about 6 hours for me to make a video like this, so please take a few seconds just to give it a like. Not only will it help me grow this channel, but it'll also help this video reach other people who are just as interested. With that said, buckle up your seatbelts and let's get started. Right, so I'm on Anthropic's website where they're talking about this new helper metaprompt feature, and as you can see, it's an experimental. And in the brief description, they're saying that, the hardest part of using an AI model is figuring out how to prompt it effectively. To help with this, they've created this helper metaprompt, and it's essentially going to guide Claude to generate a high quality prompts tailored to your specific task. Now, the really cool thing is that they've created this Metaprompt Google Colab notebook, and if I click onto this link, what they've done is they've come up with this notebook which will allow you to test out this metaprompt. Now, as you can see, there's a lot to this notebook, but don't worry, we'll be going through all of it together. But essentially, this is meant to give you an opportunity to try out this metaprompt feature without having to write all of the code yourself. So I'll start off by explaining how this metaprompt feature works, and then what we'll do is we'll take all of this code and put it into our own project directory and run it locally. And then what I'll do is I'll tailor the code so that we can get Claude to generate a prompt for us that will come up with a study plan for us to learn Python. But of course, you can then take this away and build on top of it to get it to generate any prompt that you like. Right, so let's go through this section by section. So the first section covers how you can install Anthropic and of course select the model that you want to use, but more importantly, set up the client by passing in the Anthropic API key. In my previous videos where we've worked with the Claude API, I typically store the API key in the environment because ideally you don't want to be hard coding this. You want to use a secrets manager, or of course you want to store it in an environment variable that you can inject at runtime, or you want to use a secrets manager. But this is just the basic setup of getting started with the client. Now, if I scroll further down, we come up to the metaprompt section. Now, this metaprompt section is essentially where a lot of the magic is happening. And as you can see, Anthropic are saying that this metaprompt is a long shot multi-prompt filled with half a dozen examples of good prompts for solving various tasks. So the way this works is that all of these prompts for typical tasks like summarizing a document, acting as a customer support agent, all of these different, and there's a few more, all of these different prompts are going to be provided as input so that Claude can kind of understand what makes a good prompt. And this goes off this principle in prompt engineering that when you give examples to an LLM, it makes it easier for that LLM to kind of understand what response that you want and what response that you're expecting. And there's a bit of inception here going on because as you can see, it starts off by saying, today you'll be writing instructions to an eager, helpful, but inexperienced, unworldly AI assistant. So the irony here is that what we're telling Claude is that you're going to be writing a prompt for an AI assistant, even though Claude is of course an AI assistant. So that's the bit of inception here. But in any case, it reads that you're going to be writing, these instructions for an unworldly AI assistant who needs careful instruction and examples to understand how best to behave. I will explain a task for you and you will write those instructions that will direct the assistant to best accomplish the task. Now, as you can see, this metaprompt is quite long. There's a lot to it, but if we break it down, essentially it's just a list of task instruction examples. I don't know why they haven't called it prompts, because essentially these are just prompts. Now, if I scroll to the top, you can see the first one here. It opens with this XML tag, task instruction example, and then if you scroll a bit further down below, it closes with this task instruction example tag. And then this metaprompt is just composed of a number of these task instruction example blocks. So let's take a look at one of these and understand what is inside. So as you can see, it starts off with a very basic task. So check whether two sentences say the same thing. It then defines the inputs that are going to be needed for Claude or the AI assistant to perform this task. It then breaks down the instructions for this task. And as you can see, it references those inputs. So again, it's giving Claude this idea of, this is typically what a prompt is going to look like. It's going to consist of a task. It's going to consist of some inputs, which are going to be translated into data, or the data for those inputs is going to be given by the user, and then the instructions for the task that are going to reference those inputs. And here, that's all that there is to it, right? This is one task instruction example that just compares two sentences, but there are many more below. And again, it's this idea that we're going to be giving Claude a number of these task instruction examples examples, essentially prompts, and it will be able to understand and generate a prompt following a similar structure. And the reason why this meta prompt is good is because it's quite varied in the prompts or prompt examples that we're giving to Claude. As we just saw here, we are asking Claude to check whether two sentences are saying the same thing. Here further down, we're giving Claude a document to summarize. Further down below, there's an example of a prompt related to some math. So giving Claude these varied examples will help it to kind of generate a prompt on a task that we want it to do. Now the question is, how can we get Claude to generate a prompt for us? And it's very simple. It just consists of these two variables. Now the first one is task, and this is where we define what we want Claude to do, or the AI assistant to do. And in this case, as you can see, it's draft an email responding to a customer complaint. Now in this description here, they're saying that you can change this task to anything you like, and they've given some examples like rate a resume according to a rubric, explain a complex scientific concept in simple terms, and of course you can kind of like change this to whatever task that you want Claude to do. We're going to be changing it later on in our project to get it to generate a study plan prompt for us. And the next thing that you provide, and you don't have to provide this, is a list of variables that are going to help Claude perform this task. So in the case where the task is draft an email responding to a customer complaint, it might make sense for us to, or ask the user to, provide the complaint itself from the customer along with the company name, right? Because if you provide these two pieces or these two variables to Claude and the data for those two variables, Claude will then be able to generate a response to that complaint using those two pieces of information. Now you can do one of two things here. You can leave this blank, and what Claude will do is it will come up with the variables for you. So that's one option. Or the other option is that you provide these variables, and then of course Claude will then use them in the task. Now I'd recommend testing both, see what works for you, see what prompt that you get back. Of course, as you can imagine, if you do give variables, you're just giving more information to Claude. In other words, you are giving more information to the LLM, and so I think it might lead to a better result, but you know, it's worth testing both and just seeing what works for you. And what's being done here is that all of the variables that, if you did pass them in, they're going to be put in this variable string, because this is all going to come together in a meta prompt that's going to be given to Claude. And then to get the actual generated prompt, what's being done here is that the task is being replaced. So the task that we gave in the earlier input here is going to be put inside this meta prompt. The variables are going to be put inside the input tags, and then what we're doing is we're calling out to Claude with those inputs with that task, and then Claude is going to generate the prompt and then return it back. And this is being done with the Anthropic client. You specify the model name, you specify the max tokens. Again, this code is ready to copy and run, so you can reuse it, but essentially this is what's going to take, you know, that meta prompt that we gave earlier, the task, the variables, to then return back the generated prompt from Claude. Now Anthropic have been kind enough to provide this function called pretty print, which will take back the generated prompt that Claude gives us and just print it out in a nice format. So that's quite handy. They've also given some other functions that will take the generated prompt and extract out the prompt template, right? The reason why we want that prompt template is so that we have it in a format that we can actually use, but more importantly, we want to save that, or what we'll do in the project later on, I'll show you how to do this, is we'll take that generated prompt and we'll extract it out, the template, and then what we'll be able to do is store it in a file locally. And the reason why that's key is because maybe we might want to make some additional changes to this prompt, and having it stored in the file locally will allow us to do that. So I'll show you how to do that in the project later, but these functions are essentially helper functions that just make it a bit easier to extract out the prompt template. And then the last thing here, as you can see, is giving us the opportunity to test the prompt that comes back. Here is some input, so we're going to ask the user for values for the variables that we provided or Claude generated for us. We're going to then extract out the prompt template and then replace each input with the variable or the value that was provided for each variable. We'll then populate it in a classic prompt that will then send off to Claude, right? So this is just kind of testing that everything before worked. And again, in our project later on, we're going to be doing all of this, but we'll put it in a more structured way that's going to allow us to kind of build on top of the application, but also reuse that code. All right, so hopefully this gave you a good overview of Metaprompts. What we'll do now is we're going to start off with our project. Right, so I've opened up this project in my favorite text editor, and the first file that I'm going to open is the .m file. And in here, what you want to do is type and export Anthropic API _key. and then the equal sign followed by your Anthropic API key, right? So when you go onto the dashboard, just get the API key and then just paste it here. I'm going to paste it, of course, off camera until I find a plugin that automatically hides it. But in any case, for now, yeah, just create this .m file, and that's what you're going to need before you run the program. And then in the requirements.txt file here, we want to specify the dependency that we're going to need. There's only one dependency that we're going to need, and that is the Anthropic Python SDK. So just put Anthropic followed by 2 equal signs followed by the version. The latest version at the time of recording is 0.21.3, so that should be good for you, or you can check PyPy to find the latest version. So just drop that in the requirements.txt file and make sure you give that a save. And then what I'll do is I'll switch tabs to the Google Colab, and let's copy after these 3 apostrophes, we'll copy all the text for the meta prompt. So I'm just going to take all of this with my mouse. Probably could have done this with a shortcut, and I'll make sure you exclude those 3 apostrophes right at the end. Copy that into your clipboard, and then what we'll do is we'll open up the metaprompt.txt file, and I'll paste all of that here and just make sure that's all pasted correctly. Go to the bottom of the file, that looks good. And again, yeah, we're just going to have the metaprompt in this metaprompt.txt file, and what we'll do is in our main Python application, we'll load in this metaprompt.txt file. But yeah, having it in this dedicated file just makes our program a bit cleaner. Right, so I've opened up my utils.py file, and what we want to do is go back to the Google Colab, and then what we'll do is we'll copy this pretty print function. Again, this one is just going to print out the prompt, generated prompt that comes back from Claude. We're going to need to import the regular expression library to get rid of that warning. You can delete that last line there, and there's a few more things that we want. So again, these are also helper functions. I call them util functions, but these ones are going to help to extract out the prompt template that we're going to use again. So take those, paste those here. I think we're good to go here. So those are the ones that we're going to put in the utils file, so we can save those, and then what we'll do is we'll open up the main.py file, and now we can actually start writing some code. Right, so I'm in my main.py file, and the first thing that we're going to do is import the Anthropic library. That's the library that's the Python SDK that's going to let us interact with the Claude API. The second library that we're going to import is the OS library, and that's going to let us get the environment variable, that is the Anthropic API key that we defined in the .m file earlier on. Then we're going to import the list type, and then we're going to import some of the utils functions that we copied over from the Google Colab notebook. Now, once we've imported those, the next thing that we want to do is define the model name that we're going to use. I'm using the Claude 3 Opus model, but you can use Haiku or Sonnet, whichever one you prefer. And then what we'll do is we'll set up the client, and this is where we're passing in the API key that we're getting from the environment. Again, in your .m file, you'll have the key Anthropic API key. And then what we're doing here is we're just setting up the Anthropic client by passing in the API key. Right, and then the next thing we want to do is have a function that's going to generate the meta prompt. And the way this is going to work is we're going to give it a task and a variable string. Again, the task is kind of a high-level summary of what you want this prompt to do. And the variable string is the different variables. Again, this is optional, but the different variables that are going to feed into this task, right? And essentially, this is just going to give Claude some context of the type of prompt to generate. Given that in this application, we want Claude to come up with a prompt that's going to generate a study plan for us to learn Python, I want to provide a few variables. I want to provide the thing that we want to learn, which is Python. I want to say how many hours that we can commit to study. So basically study time or commitment time, whatever you want to call it. We'll decide what we want to call it a bit later on. And other bits and pieces that are just going to help Claude generate this prompt that's going to be designed to come up with a really good tailored study plan for us. Right, so what we'll do is we're going to open up the metaprompt.txt file that we created early on that contains the metaprompt that we copied from Google Colab. And then what we'll do is we'll go back to Google Colab, and in the section where it gives the metaprompt, which is here, if you scroll down further below, when it comes to actually, or this is the bit where it generates the prompt, we want to copy this, and then we'll go back to our text editor here, and then I will paste it here. So I will put that here, and then just to make this a bit easier, and then what we'll do is close that. That looks good, and this is going to we'll get it to return back the message, right? So just to remind ourselves, what we're doing is we're opening up the metaprompt, and we're going to put it into a variable called metaprompt. And then what we've done is we've copied this code here from the Google Colab that's going to actually take the task I've called it task. And then what it's going to do is take the variables that we provided in the variable string. It's going to put that in between the input XML tags in the meta prompt. And then this is where it issues out that prompt to the Claude API. Here it's taking the model name. I mentioned that we're using Opus. It defines the number or the maximum number of tokens that it's going to return, and then it's just getting the prompt together in this message array. And then we define the temperature to 0. With respect to the temperature, 0 is better when you want analytical responses, and then you change it closer to 1 or up to 1 if you want more creative responses. So this is something again that you might want to play around with. Maybe not in this instance because we're asking it to come up with a structured and clearly defined prompt, but if you are writing your own prompts, temperature is a variable that you want to kind of mess around with to find the optimal value for your own prompts, right? And then we're just finishing off by returning the message, which is essentially the generated prompt. And then what we want is the ability to be able to run the prompt that Claude gives back to us, and we want to be able to pass the values in for the variables, right? So to do that, we're going to create a method called test prompt. That's going to take in 2 parameters, prompt with variables, which is the prompt template, and then the variables themselves, right? And then what we'll have this function do is it's going to iterate through each variable that's required in this prompt, and it's going to ask us for the value. And to get this, if you go back to the Google Colab, in the section where you see testing your prompt template, what you want to do is just copy this entire code block and then paste it here. And then I will just fix the indent. And then what this is going to do is iterate through each of the variable. It's going to ask us for the values. The extracted prompt template is actually for us the prompt with variable, so we don't need that. And then what we'll do is we'll come down here. We don't need to print it out. Instead, we just want to return it back. So I'll just have that return message, right? So essentially, just to remind you, this function is going to take in the generated prompt. We've called it prompt with variables. It's going to take the variables that are required for this prompt. It's going to iterate through each one of them, ask us for the value. And then it's going to update the value into that prompt, and then it's going to send it off to the Claude, and then we'll return back the response we get. Right, so let's put all of this together. We can do that by first defining our entry point using the ifname main snippet in Python, and then what we'll do is we'll ask for the task that we want a prompt to be generated for. We're going to be running this application ourselves, so when we run this, the task that we're going to be providing for this project is getting Claude to generate a prompt that's going to create a study plan for us. So that's going to ask for the task, and then what we'll do is we'll have a variable CSV, and these are the variables that again we're going to ask the user for, in this case us, what variables that we want to be fed into this generated prompt, right? So if you think about it, for this particular task, when we're generating a study plan, the variables that we might want to provide are the topic, how many hours can we commit a week, what methods that we like to learn, whether we prefer YouTube or books, whatever they might be, right? But the point is, this task and the variables, they should be dynamic, right? So like you should allow the user to provide them when they're running the program, right? Because if you fix them here now, you're only going to make them work for one particular use case, and you want to leave that more flexible. Then what we want to do is declare a variable string that we're going to leave empty for now. And then if the user provided some variables that they want to feed into the generated prompt, we will iterate through each one of those variables. And given that we asked them to enter it as a comma separated list or string, I've called it list, but yeah, it really is a string, we'll use the Python split function that will split all of those elements by comma. So what you're going to end up with is an array of variables, and then we'll iterate through each one, and we'll put it into this variable string because we're going to then pass that on to Claude to generate the prompt. And then the next thing that we're going to do is call the method that we defined earlier to generate the meta prompt, right? And that's going to take in the task and the variable string, and then we'll make use of the helper function provided to us in the Google Colab notebook, and that is the pretty print function. Again, we put this in the utils.py file, and that's going to print out the prompt in a nice way that was generated from Claude, right? So that's going to generate the meta prompt, print it out, and then we also want to extract out the prompt template. Again, this is a function defined in the utils.py file that we took from the Google Colab notebook. We want to also extract out the variables, and then what we'll do is we'll print them out, right? So we're going to print out the variables for this generated prompt, and of course we're going to also print out the extracted prompt template, right? And then what I want to do, given that this extracted prompt template is the one that was generated by Claude, I want to store that in a text file, and I'll call this text file generated prompt.txt. We'll write the extracted prompt template to this text file, file, and then we'll just print out a message saying that it's been written. And the reason why is not only will it allow us to review the generated prompt later on after we've run this program, but also it means that we can kind of make changes to it. And if we want to then use it, maybe we want to interact through an LLM via the console and not do it via code, we're going to have this prompt template that we can refer back to, copy and paste, edit, update, you know, how we see fit. So having it in a text file is going to be very useful, and so I'm going to write it to this generated prompt text file here. Now up until this point, we've now generated the prompt, we've got it back from Claude, we've extracted it out, right? So it's in a form that can now be tested. So let's test it. So what we can do is we can call the method that we defined earlier called test prompt. We pass in the extracted prompt template, we pass in the variables, and again these variables are going to contain the data that we entered, right, or the user entered when we run this program. So this will make a bit more sense when we actually run the program. You'll see it in action, but essentially we can now test this prompt and we can give it the values for the variables that we defined early on. And like I did before, what I want to do is write out the prompt output to a text file. So I'm going to call this prompt output.txt, write using the file handle again and this context manager, and of course print out that we've written this prompt to this prompt output text file. Right, and there's just one more thing that we need to do before we can run the program. I noticed I made a mistake. So if you go to the main.py file, you should already be in it actually. And if you come to the top of the file, you might have noticed that we imported this list type here. Cut it for now. So I'm going to cut it. And then if you go to the utils.py file, we want to paste it at the top of this file here. In this case, it hasn't cut it for whatever reason. That's my editor, but hopefully that it worked for you. And then once you've cut it and imported it here, what we want to do is come to this method called extract between tags. And then at the end here, as you can see, we're making use of, in this case, it's a lowercase list. Just update it to these, to the actual type. And then we're good to go. We can now run this application. Right, so let's set up our virtual environment. You can do that by typing python 3.8 -m venv, and in this case we're going to create a virtual environment called venv. If you tap enter, it will then create the virtual environment. We can then activate it by typing in source venv bin activate, and then what we can do is install the requirements into that virtual environment. And what we're going to do is use the R flag, which is going to reference the requirements.txt file. If I tap enter, that will now install all of the requirements in that virtual environment, and now we can give the application a run. All right, so it's my favorite time in the video. It's now time to run the application, and let's quickly remind ourselves what it's going to do. So again, this is making use of a new feature by Anthropic called Metaprompts, and essentially this is a way for Claude to generate a well-crafted and structured prompt for us. And the idea is that this metaprompt contains a list of well-structured prompts that Claude can use to then generate the prompt for us. And what we've done is created a project locally that kind of makes use of all of this, but in a structured and flexible way that we can then build on top of later on. And of course, what we're also doing is storing the generated prompt that comes back from Claude, but also the result that comes back when we actually run this prompt. So let's give it a run. So if I type python 3 main.py and tap enter, as you can see, I'm now being asked for the task. So I'm just going to type generate a study plan for me. And then in terms of the variables that make sense for this task, let's say the topic, right? Because when it comes to a study plan for what, right? So let's specify topic is a variable for which we want to provide the input. Let's say learner level. Let's say commitment time. So, you know, this can be hours a week or number of days a week. So we'll do commitment time. And then I will say preferred medium. So this will kind of refer to how, or the different mediums that we prefer to learn from. So it might be YouTube, it might be books, wherever it might be. Of course, you can add your own variables, but I think this makes sense for a prompt that's going to generate a study plan. So I'm going to tap enter. Now, as you can see, it's taking a while. It's using the Claude 3 Opus model. So it might take a few seconds to come back before it can give us a well-crafted prompt. Right, so that did take 20 or 30 seconds to run. But as you can see, it's generated a pretty in-depth prompt, right? So if I scroll up, can I find the beginning? As you can see, introduce the task and explain what information will be needed from the user. So again, this is kind of the prompt that Claude is going to give to the AI assistant, right? Because what we're saying to Claude is generate a prompt that you can give to an AI assistant, right? And so what we're going to do, of course, is copy this, and we can give this to an LLM ourselves, right? But it is crafting the prompt through that lens, in that it's going to give this prompt to an AI assistant, right? So it's kind of structuring it in that regard. prompt. So what it's saying here is introduce the task and explain what information will be needed. Ask the user to provide the topic that they want to study. So this is making use of the topic variable. And as you can see, it's saying it's going to be enclosed in the topic tags, right? So this is quite good because again, it's using the variable that we provided. Here, ask the user to indicate how much time per week they can commit to study, enclosed in commitment time tags. So this is really good, right? So we gave it the variable commitment time, and it's inferred that that refers to how much time that we can commit to studying, right? So this is already very good, right? And as you can see, it's given instructions and it's giving messages. Please provide the topic you want to study. What is your current level of knowledge? And yeah, and I think if I scroll further down, it's also given instructions. And yeah, this is also giving it based on other examples. So yeah, it's pretty incredible. And we've stored this, so we will take a look at it. But at the bottom now, it's waiting for some input. So here it's asking me to enter a value for variable commitment time. So let's say I have about 4 hours a week, and I'll tap enter. And then I'll enter a value for variable topic. So I want to learn Python. And then preferred medium, I think YouTube and books. And then learner level, let's say beginner. And then now, as you can see, what it's doing is it's going to take the values of all of those variables, combine it with the generated prompt, and then send it off to Claude, and then hopefully give us back a response. Opus is definitely the slowest model of Claude 3, so this might take a while to give us back the output. Right, so again, that took about 20 to 30 seconds, but it's written out the result that's come back to this prompt output file. So what I'll do is I'll open it up and we can take a look at it. Right, so again, we've written out two files. One is the generated prompt, and I covered a bit of it very briefly, but I just want to show you exactly what it is asking Claude to do. So here in this section, once we've provided the values for the variables like learner level, commitment time, preferred medium, it is that Claude is sort of generating this prompt that's saying, using the information provided, generate a study plan customized to the learner's needs and preferences. And then here it's giving it specific kind of rules. So it's saying be appropriate for the learner's specific knowledge level. And this is where it's going to make use of the learner level that we provided. Break the overall topic down into key concepts, ideas, and subtopics. Lay out a weekly schedule suggesting how much time to devote. And this is going to take into account the learner's specific time commitment. And then what we'll do at the end is this is the final kind of instruction, which is write the complete study plan inside these study plan tags. So yeah, as you can see, it's a very well crafted prompt, and if you want, you can also tailor this, right? Maybe you want to add another variable name, maybe you want to provide more variables, in which case you can just update this generated prompt, and then, you know, from here you can then load it in and then call out to Claude, or you can even just copy this directly, open up ChatGPT or Claude, the console, and then paste this in, and then it will do the same thing, in that it will ask you for the values for these variables. So let's now that you have an idea of the generated prompt, let's take a look at the prompt output, right? So the result that came back when we actually ran this prompt, and we provided some values for learning Python. Right, so as you can see, this is the prompt output text file, and this is the study plan that came back once we asked for a plan to learn Python, right? So here is a customized study plan for learning Python as a beginner with a time commitment of 4 hours per week using YouTube videos and books. So week 1 for 4 hours, learn the basic syntax, data types, variables in Python. It's also given Python tutorial for absolute beginners by CS Dojo on YouTube. I think that's probably one of the most popular videos. Read chapters 1 to 2 in Python crash course by Eric Matthews, I believe that's how you pronounce his name. But this is really good, right? Because I said that I prefer YouTube and books, and it's referencing a YouTube video directly, and it's also giving specific chapters from a book, which is pretty incredible. The only thing is I am offended that I'm not being included here in terms of resources for learning Python, but I guess let's just say I don't have any. My videos tend to be projects, so I'll use that as my excuse. That will help me sleep at night. But if we go further down, it's also giving more links for Python tutorials, or it's recommending that you can go into YouTube to watch these Python tutorials. Corey Schaefer, one of my favorite YouTubers for learning Python. I'm not sure if he still makes any videos, but yeah, he was definitely one of my favorite YouTubers when I learned Python many years ago. So that's like week 1, and then week 2, again, it's doing a similar breakdown, what you're going to learn, what you should watch, what you should read, and here it's also recommending what you should practice, and it's recommending that here too. And so this is breaking it down. How many weeks are here? We've got week 3, week 4, So 4 weeks, and then it's ending off with this kind of recommendation that continue practicing Python by working on incremental projects. You know what, that's where you add Imdad code should be here. So there should be some YouTube videos linking how you can learn Python with projects, because I think I'm one of the few YouTubers that do that. So definitely check out my other videos. Here, as you can see, it's referencing other books too, and it's also referencing the website Real Python, which is a pretty good website with articles and tutorials and courses for learning Python. And as you can see, it's put it all in these study plan XML tags, right? So that's at the bottom, and if I go to the top, as you can see, it's here too. So this is a really good learning plan, right? And it's broken it down, but more importantly, the value of this was that it generated the prompt for us to give us this result, which is pretty incredible. Right, so if you're interested in more Claude API tutorials, I'll link to a playlist here where I've already made a few Python project videos on how you can submit and summarize PDFs with the Claude API, how you can send images to the Claude API and ask questions about those images, and a few other videos too. Other than that, please do not leave this video without at least giving it a like, and if you are interested in more Python project videos, make sure you subscribe and tap the bell icon so you get notified when I release more videos. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.